Chris saw the drone flying away from his apartment and raised an eyebrow. He hadn't ordered anything, certainly nothing that a drone would deliver, and he came up the stairs 2 at a time before his crackhead neighbors came to steal it. Calling them crackheads might have seemed a little disparaging, but Chris had actually come home and found them smoking crack on the front porch, so he thought it was more than fair. The Palm Breeze weekly rentals were far from posh, but they were the best he could afford. Chris had a dead-end job that barely paid him minimum wage and hardly worked him part-time these days. He was behind on his rent, looking at ramen noodles for dinner again, and if he was lucky, he might get halfway through tonight's football game before they shut his cable off. He bet that Robert was eating well, though, and breathed out angrily as he came to the top of the stairs. Of course Robert was eating well. Robert was rich. Robert was a doctor, and not the kind from a hospital. He had a perfect wife and perfect kids and a perfect home and everything handed to him. Robert had been the favorite ever since that damn test when he was 6, and there had never been anything for Chris after that. Robert was Chris's younger brother, 4 years his junior, but his parents had always had a soft spot for him. Chris had always sort of been a normal kid. He played outside, watched cartoons, made games with his toys, and never excelled at anything in particular. Chris was an okay baseball player, and he had helped take his football team to state when he was a junior. But his studies were never more than middle of the road. Chris was a solid C student, all of his teachers said so, and no one could much fault him for it. Robert, though, Robert was exceptional. His mother had been ecstatic when she got the results of the test. His grade had participated in one of those IQ test programs, and Robert had scored at the top of his class. The testers figured that he had an IQ around 194, and by their mother's estimation, that made him a genius. After that, Chris found himself left by the wayside more often than not. It was hard to focus on someone who didn't really seem to want to put in the effort. The package was about the size of a shoebox, covered in black duct tape, and spray painted to a metallic black that kinda clashed with the tape underlay. Chris picked it up, wondering what he had ordered. When did he have the money to order anything? He remembered the other night when his dinner had been a large bottle of Mad Dog 2020 and a quick trip to Oblivion. He had splurged on the largest bottle he could find at the gas station, something to wash down the hot dogs and the off-brand chips with, and it seemed that maybe he'd been doing some late-night purchasing, too. He sighed as he brought it inside, looking through the app on his phone to check how much of his money the little package had cost him. His bank account was still in the double digits, his savings barely in the single digits, so everything was normal there. He was glad that he wouldn't have to skip his meals till Friday, and his curiosity was piqued as he brought the package to the table. There was no address, return or otherwise, and he took the box cutter out of his pocket as he opened the tape. Chris expected it to spray confetti or a bad smell, the usual sorts of pranks people played, but inside was another box and a note. The box inside was red, about the size of a children's shoebox, spray-painted and wrapped in tape as well, and as Chris took the note out, he read it over carefully. "Hello, valued customer. Inside is exactly what you ordered, your deepest desire, and a warning. As we discussed, the item is not something to be taken lightly. It will not always grant you what you expect, but it will absolutely grant you your greatest desire. I've given you a chance to think about it before you proceed, and a chance to turn back if you're having second thoughts. Regards." There was no signature at the bottom. Chris read the note over a couple of times, not quite sure what to make of it. There were some disreputable people in the area, people way worse than the druggies next door, and Chris really didn't want these people mad at him. He rechecked the outside of the box, hoping for an address or something, but there was still nothing there. He sat it on the table, looked at it dubiously, before taking out the red box and deciding to continue. Screw it, all they could do was kill him, right? He cut the tape on the red box, and as he looked in, he found a green box about the size of an oatmeal box, with another note. "Hello, valued customer. If you're reading this, then you've chosen to proceed. Very well, I can't stop you, but you have to be prepared to use it. Before you use the item, take a moment to picture the thing that is your greatest desire. Picture it, smell it, know its feel, its taste, if you can, what it sounds like. Know it as well as anyone can. Open the next box when it's in your mind and your heart. Regards. Chris looked at the red box and was glad he had read the warning. What the hell was this? With every box he opened, he was more confident that this was something he hadn't ordered. That being said, he was also more than sure it was something he wanted. His greatest desire. What was his greatest desire? Money? Power? Prestige? The more he thought about it, the more he realized what he wanted, though. How many nights had he lain in bed and wished for nothing so much as a button that made his brother never exist? How often had he watched his brother play the violin, show his parents a test, or talk about how well he'd done at mathletics, and wanted nothing so much as to walk into traffic? It didn't help that Robert was also not afflicted with the acne or the braces that many of his peers had. He was handsome, effortlessly fit, and many of Chris's girlfriends had commented on the fact that he was so much better looking than Chris. Chris knew what he wanted, but could he do it? He opened the red box and found a yellow box about the size of a bracelet box, and another note. Hello, valued customer. If you're reading this, then it is assumed that you have taken everything I've said to heart. You have the thing you desire in your mind and are ready to use it. Keep it in your thoughts, keep it close to your heart, hold fast to your desires, and open the yellow box. Regards. Chris had the box half opened when a little voice attempted to assert itself in his mind. Was this okay? Despite getting all his parents' love and attention, his brother had never been anything but kind to him. He loved his big brother, even though Chris had never given him anything but hostility or indifference. How many times had he offered to give Chris money? Not a loan, but just to give. How often had he offered Chris a job at Applied Genetics? Not quite as nice as the one I have, but even our janitorial staff make a fine living wage, he had said, giving him a look that begged him to accept. Chris believed that the job, like the offer of money, had been an insult, if not pity. Chris wouldn't have any of that from his little brother, especially when it was his fault that he hadn't managed to go to college in the first place. Chris still seethed about it, burning to this day about the fact that his current state was all due to the fact that there had been no money to send him to college. When Chris was a junior in high school, he had been offered a sports scholarship to a small college in state. It wasn't Yale or Harvard, but it would have allowed Chris to succeed. He could have studied something, could have made more of himself than just a register monkey at a grocery store, and it was all Robert's fault that he hadn't gone. His parents had heard him out, heard his plans, and told him flatly that he would have to ride the scholarship on his own dime. We have to think about Robert's future. He'll be going to college in 2 years, and he's studying some pretty costly stuff. We're going to have to save everything we have to get him there, and as much as we'd like to give you the same opportunity, your brother's studies have to come first right now. If you can pay your own way, you're more than welcome to go to college, but otherwise, I'm sorry to say we just don't have it to give. Chris crumpled the letter in his hand as he thought about it. His brother had left for college at 15, quite an accomplishment, with no less than 5 different scholarships to help him get there. They couldn't have given him just a little bit so he might have had a better life. How could a 17-year-old boy hope to pay his own way through college? They would have forced him into crippling debt for nothing except a chance at something better. Chris hadn't even played football his senior year. He just hadn't seen the point of it anymore, and after graduation, he had slipped into the life he now endured. Right? Bah! It was more than right. It was time for Chris to get his. It was time for him to get his due and his chance. He grimaced as he opened the yellow box, a corner slicing his finger as it caught on the way past. Inside was a blue box, about the size of a ring box, and another note. The letter splotched with his blood as he opened it, the little cut bleeding slightly as he read. Hello, valued customer. This is your last chance to turn back. If you pack the box away again and place it on your doorstep, I will send my drone to collect it. There is no shame in choosing to walk away. One's greatest desire is often someone that no one wants once they have it. You would not be thought less of for returning the package unopened. If you choose to proceed, however, Then close your eyes. Keep the full image of your greatest desire in mind. Open the box as you visualize it, and when you open the box, the desire will be fulfilled. Regards. Chris closed his eyes, thinking of his brother as he prepared to disappear him. He could smell his cologne, Old Spice, hear his voice as it droned on, feel his handshake or one of his hugs, remember the way his voice had changed as he grew, hear his laugh when he was happy, feel his pain when he was sad, and as he thought about it, Chris stopped halfway through opening the box. Was this really what he wanted? How many times had his brother called just to see what he was doing? How many times had he paid for dinner or lunch just to see his big brother? Even as he looked back at the offer, he couldn't really believe that he had made it out of spite. Chris hesitated, but as his thumb pulled free, the box lid opened, and he disappeared his brother from his mind and from his heart. He'd come too far to turn back now. Something puffed into his face, and he coughed as a freezing wind burnt his lips and cheeks. He could hear something, a child's laughter, a crackling fire, the smell of smoke, a child's scream in fear, the sound of a car horn, and then silence. He didn't dare open his eyes, thinking he had been sprayed with some sort of chemical, maybe even a hallucinogen, but as the seconds ticked on, he couldn't help but peek through his lids. He was still sitting in his filthy apartment. Nothing better, nothing worse. He looked around, confused, snorting when he thought about how he'd been taken in. He'd just wasted his time on someone's idea of a joke. Why had he thought something like this would actually work? He knew better than to believe in magic, or curses, or whatever this was. He let the box fall back into the larger box and went to the bathroom to wash his face. When he came back, his phone was ringing, and he was surprised to see that it was his mother. She never called unless she wanted to tell him about something that Robert had done, and he sighed as he picked it up. "Hi, Mom." "Well, don't sound so thrilled to hear from your only mother." Chris had a seat, turning on the TV as he waited for it to warm up. "Uh-huh. How's it going? What did Robert do now? Win a Nobel Prize? Get a raise? Cure cancer?" She was silent for a few seconds, and Chris had to look down at the screen to make sure he hadn't lost her. "Who?" she finally asked. "Robert? My little brother? The protege? Christopher, are you on drugs? You don't have a brother. You're an only child." Chris let that sink in, trying to dispute her, but realizing that it was becoming harder to remember Robert. He was like a distant memory, something from his childhood, and the memory was getting harder and harder to bring to the forefront. The longer he sat there, the less he could recall about him, and he suspected that soon there would be nothing left. "Right, my bad. I was thinking about something else, I guess." He and his mother had a short conversation, her asking when he was bringing his laundry and inviting him to dinner, and he hung up before a bored "I love you." Chris hung up too and looked around his apartment once more. If his brother had never existed, then why was he living in this shithole? Why was he still doing so poorly if he'd gotten to go to college? He looked at the hat rack by the door and realized his apron was still hanging from the hook, meaning he still worked at the grocery store. It was like... He let his mouth slip open, the realization hitting him like a ton of bricks. It had nothing to do with Robert. It was him. This was just as good as it was going to get for him. As he sat on the couch, reflecting on all this, he jumped as something bumped the door. He walked quickly, wondering if it was a ghost, maybe the vengeful ghost of Roger? Reggie? Whoever he was here for revenge now or something, and Chris was relieved when he saw the manila envelope and the drone fleeing into the sky. He brought it inside, seeing the familiar message and not liking it at all. "Dear less-than-valued thief, you have intercepted a very important package that was not meant for you. If you haven't opened it yet, then place it on the porch and leave it for pickup. If you have, then don't worry. My associates will be there soon to extract payment. less than fond regards. Chris sat on the couch, feeling the cold eels wiggling in his stomach, his mind trying to cling to the memories of his brother, but unable as fear took root. No matter how terrible his life was, there was a silver lining. He wouldn't be alive to suffer it for much longer. That's when he thought back to his earlier thoughts, realizing how wrong he had been. If they could do something like erase a person from existence, then killing him wasn't likely the worst thing they could do. When I came home from work and saw the package on the front porch, I was filled with an irrational flood of joy. You would have thought I'd received something spectacular, and to me, I had. I'd been waiting for 5 days for Amazon to send the package, and as I brought it inside and cut the tape, I couldn't wait to see how it looked. Reaching into the buffer pads, I pulled out not a game or a new Funko Pop, but a single light bulb in a package that seemed bigger than it should have needed to be. Not just any light bulb, however, but one of those color-changing LED light bulbs. I'd seen them on TikTok and thought they looked cool. They would go through a whole spectrum of colors thanks to the little remote they came with, and I thought the whole operation looked very soothing. I like to watch people lay in bed as the colors shifted, and I thought it might help with my recent mood. I'd been experiencing some heavy seasonal depression lately, and the inclusion of some colored lights might be just what I was missing. I read the instructions and installed the bulb in my ceiling fan, and smiled as I looked at the little remote in my hand. There were so many colors to choose from, and I felt a giddy sense of anticipation. Which one should I try first? Red? Maybe blue? I settled on a light and buttery yellow as I lay in my bed. I felt like I was in some kind of sun. The ones I'd drawn as a kid, it seemed. The yellows were thick, the shade of melted crayons, and I was happy as I lay beneath it in my single room. It had been hard to get out in the cold lately, and this made me feel like I was at the park, under the warm sun at the beach, maybe. It wasn't actually warm, but I could trick my mind into thinking that it was, at least. I lay there for a few minutes, just soaking up the faint sunlight before I got up and went to my computer. As I logged into World of Warcraft for a little gaming, I looked at the remote and decided on a different color. As I explored in the game, I changed the colors to depend on where I was going. The rusty red of Orgrimmar, the deep green of Stranglethorn, the light blue of the Undercity, back to the sunny yellow for the Barrens, and so on and so on. The bulb had a color for every occasion, it seemed, and I really enjoyed playing with it as the evening progressed. I fell asleep that night under the soft, dark blue of a night sky, and I slept better than I had in a long time. In my downtime the following week, I found myself playing with the light, trying out the different colors. I discovered a button for mixing colors and found myself making color combinations that turned my room into all kinds of different shades. I found I liked a few of them. The blue and green combination reminded me of the undersea videos I'd seen on Discovery Channel when I was a kid. There was a red and yellow of the deep desert, the purple-blue of icy peaks, and I found myself lying in bed some evenings after work and just trying different combinations. I fell asleep on Thursday night, the soft blue and deep purple making me think of glaciers, and woke up to a nightmare. I opened my eyes and found myself floating in a room that looked smeared with blood. The walls seemed to hold strange shadows, the reds and blacks mingling like filth in a morgue. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst were the creatures. They were dirty white that was almost translucent, their eyes like lamps as they stared at my prone form. I wasn't sure what to make of them at first, and I wondered if I was dreaming. If I was, this was the most realistic dream I had ever had. Their bodies were long and narrow, like pale reeds, and other than their eyes, they seemed devoid of features. There were two of them, one in the corner by my desk and the other perched in the junction of the ceiling and wall. We stared at each other for some undeterminable amount of time, and I was nearly convinced that I was actually dreaming when my phone chirped and lit up on the nightstand. All three of us looked at the light, and when I looked back at them, the one in the corner of the ceiling had dropped soundlessly onto the floor. The skin around the bottom of his head seemed to rip open to reveal a double row of buttery yellow teeth. His fellow creature did the same, and as the two stalked closer to me on their noodly-looking arms, I whimpered and reached for the bat that I kept beside my bed. As I turned, I must have rolled over on the remote. As the bulb changed back to the same buttery yellow I had basked in on the first day, I came up with the bat out in front of me to find the room devoid of nightmare creatures. I turned it back to the normal fluorescence and looked around in a panic, trying to figure out what had just happened. I was still awake when the sunrise lit the windows, and I wasn't sure I'd ever sleep again with the image of those creatures thumping around in my head. I tried to get about my morning routine, getting ready for work and getting breakfast together, but the image of those horrible things would never leave me. They followed me through my day, dogging my steps as I tried to get my work done, but by lunch, I was a mess. When my boss saw me in the break room, my shaking hands struggling to open my lunch bag, she told me I looked ill and said I should go home and get some rest. "You look ill, dear. Take the day off and have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday." I told her that wasn't necessary, but she insisted. I was grateful for the chance to get some rest, but I found my anxiety growing as I got home, the same place I had seen those horrors. I checked the corners where I had seen them, hoping to find some sign that it had just been a dream, and I was rewarded with nothing. There were no marks on the eggshell white walls, no signs of claws or dirt from the filthy skin of the creatures, but it did little to soothe me. Sign or not, I knew I hadn't been dreaming, and that meant that these things had to be real. The idea that I couldn't see them, that they only existed in the dark, was even more terrifying. But despite my fears, the need to find out what they were and how they had disappeared without any sign just wouldn't leave me. I started by just turning off the lights, but I didn't think that would do much good. I'd woken up in the dark plenty of times, and I'd never seen anything like those creatures. No, I thought, it had to have something to do with that light that I had seen covering the walls. It had changed when I rolled onto the remote, and whatever combination I had bumped had allowed me to see the creatures. I knew about things that you couldn't see with the naked eye, things that were too small or hard to see outside the right color spectrum, and I wondered if these creatures were like that. More importantly, if I could only see them in that spectrum, then was it a two-way street? Could they only see me when that spectrum was on? Might explain why they didn't attack me otherwise. I didn't want to see them. The thought of looking at them terrified me, but I was curious as well. The thought of them followed me as surely as the creatures might, and I needed to be sure of what they were. I was no scientist, not by a long shot, but my desire for answers was greater than my self-preservation in this case. I started playing with different color combinations on the remote, my bat always at the ready. Before you ask, I tried red and black, but gave me something like a desert cave more than anything. The remote was small, but if you held the buttons, the colors would change further. They would get darker or lighter. They might even change depth and perception, and the combinations really were vast. My computer sat untouched that weekend, my books and TV left to catch dust, and by Sunday, I was a mess. Hadn't slept much that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were the faces of the monsters that stalked me, and my rest was pretty thin. When someone knocked on my door, I jumped and looked around fitfully. I peeked down the hallway as someone knocked again, and when Debbie called my name, I realized it wasn't the monsters trying to trick me out of my little cocoon. I didn't even realize I wasn't dressed for company until I made it to the door. I was in clothes that my mother would have called grubs, and my hair was loose and unwashed. I likely smelled. I hadn't showered since Friday morning, and was extremely self-conscious as I opened the door to my apartment. Debbie smiled, bundled up against the cold, and when she saw the state of me, she came right in and asked what was wrong. "Wendy said you had been sent home on Friday with some kind of illness, and I see why now. You look terrible. It's not the COVID, is it?" she said, pulling her scarf up over her nose and mouth. "No, I'm not actually sick," I admitted. "Then what's going on? Have you been sleeping okay? Here." She took egg drop soup out of a bag and set it on the couch. "I brought you your favorite sick soup to help you get past this." I smiled, realizing that I hadn't eaten since the night before, when that delicious steam hit my nose. Bless her. Debbie was a true friend. As we sat, Debbie had brought dumplings to go along with the soup. I told her about the weird creatures that I had seen. Unlike me, Debbie looked excited at the prospect of seeing something different. Debbie was into things like ghost hunting and cryptids, and she loved the idea of actually getting to see one. "Oh my gosh, you gotta let me help. Come on, we'll have a picnic in your room. If this is making you sick, I want to help you see it through." I was glad for her help, but I didn't want to get her caught up in the same crap I was likely getting caught up in. Debbie was my best friend, and the thought of the creature getting her too, all thanks to my damn curiosity, was something I would rather avoid. Debbie, however, was not taking no for an answer. We took the food to my room, and I showed her the remote and the bulb. Debbie scratched her chin as she looked at the buttons, asking if I was sure it was red and black, as she started working through the settings. When I woke up, it was definitely red and black, but it was different. It was greasy looking, ethereal, not quite real. It was like a dream. That's why it took me so long to realize I was awake. Debbie started changing the colors in quick succession, the colors dancing as they went through the spectrum. I was afraid she would burn it out, the colors changing too quickly for my liking, but she just shook her head at me. She said it was fine. They were meant to sustain these kinds of things, and it would speed it up if she just kept flipping through. So we sat there, eating and flipping the lights at an almost nauseating pace for the next few hours. The sun went down and the moon came up, and as I lay on the bed and played on my phone, I realized it was almost midnight suddenly. I had to go back to work the next day, and I told Debbie I needed to get to bed. "Look, I appreciate your help, but I've got to be up early in the morning." Just a little more," Debbie said, the lights still dancing by. I know I can do it." I rolled over and shook my head, reaching for the remote. "Look, I appreciate your help, but I just don't think it can be done." She moved a little away, still flipping through the colors as I reached, and as I came off the bed, she scuttled a little further back. "Come on, just a little longer. You can be a little tired tomorrow in exchange for a good night's sleep, right?" "No, Debbie, I'm tired. I need to..." I grabbed the remote, Debbie pulling back, and that's when it fell over us. I don't know how, but we were both suddenly enveloped in the aura of dirty red and black light. The walls oozed like fresh blood. The dark hung around them like smog, and I was suddenly aware that we weren't alone. There were more than two this time, their numbers nearly a dozen, as they clung to the walls and the ceiling like grisly insects. Debbie's mouth hung open, her scream stuck midway up her throat, and I realized this had likely not been what she was expecting. As their mouths split their faces, their teeth huge, my hands shook and my stomach dropped. They fell on us then, and I rolled under the bed without thinking. Debbie's scream came out, loud and strong, and I pulled my knees to my chest as I tried to think about what to do. They were killing her. They were killing my best friend, and the only thing I could think of was changing the lights back. It had worked the first time. Maybe it would work now. I looked around, finding the remote on the ground, but as I reached for it, I saw the giant yellow eyes find me. One of those noodly arms came reaching for me, and as my fingers found the plastic face, I pushed the first button I could find and snatched it away from the sharp teeth of the creature. The light turned to something like normal before it popped loudly, and I was left in darkness. I got out my phone and switched on the flashlight, looking around and finding nothing but the ruined remains of our picnic. By the light of my phone, I discovered that the creatures were gone, but I also discovered that Debbie was gone, too. I've ordered another light bulb, but it won't arrive until tomorrow. I paid for express shipping, but I don't know if that'll be soon enough to save Debbie. I don't want to see those things ever again, but if there's a chance that Debbie's still alive, I have to find her. She wanted to help me, and now it's my turn to try and help her. So be careful with your new light bulbs if you buy one. You may see more than you bargained for, and you may lose more than just the cost of shipping. I'm not proud of it, but when you receive one of those calls about your car's extended warranty, it's sometimes me. I'm a writer, a published writer, with an agent, a bestseller, and everything. 5 years ago, I was number 3 on several bestseller lists. 5 years ago, Oprah featured my book on her book list. 5 years ago, I sat on Ellen DeGeneres and promoted the crap out of my book, a move that netted me the house I now live in. It was a good year for me, and when my agent suggested that I write a sequel, I jumped at the chance. 5 years later, my sequel is finally coming together, but the bills don't stop just because your royalties and your residuals stop rolling in. My wife went back to her job at the grocery store, something to help pay the bills while I was working on my book, but it just wasn't enough. We had lived a little too grandly for the last 4 years, and now the money was gone. I told her I was paying the bills out of the residuals, but in reality, it was the salary I made working call center jobs like this one. Call center jobs are pretty easy, all things considered. You read a script, you call gullible people and offer them goods and services, you rake in little bonuses when you manage to trick the old or the infirm. It also allows me to work from home so I can proofread pages and research chapters while I cold call people in my pajamas. You get a lot of hate, a lot of people playing games, but that kind of thing is easy to ignore. Hell, I did retail for 8 years when I was young, and it's given me a pretty thick skin. It was easy to ignore when you realized that whether you made the sale or not, you were still going to receive a check at the end of the week. It was a pretty good gig, until I cold called someone I shouldn't have. The voice that picked up the phone was deep, cultured, and I should have known that it wasn't a voice of someone that could be fooled with such a cheap trick. He was the last number on my sheet for the day, and I figured I had nothing to lose. Yes, sir, I'm calling you about your car's extended warranty. Do you still own the 2013 Link? Does this ever actually work? I stumbled for a moment, choosing to roll on with the script rather than break character. Lincoln, the warranty is nearing its expiration, and we're offering select customers this is the 5th call I've received from your company today, young man. I started to ignore it, like I'd ignored the others, but I figured I'd pick up this time and see what was so important. I see now that the answer was nothing. I tried to stay in character, but it was hard in the face of his frank honesty. Look, I'm just doing my job, sir. I've got bills to pay and a family to feed, same as you. If you aren't interested, then Oh, a family man! Is that why you take the elderly for their pensions and scam the mentally handicapped for their hard-earned money? Such a provider. I'm sure your children would be proud of their father. He said it in such a matter-of-fact way that I almost didn't register it as an insult. I could have hung up on him. He wasn't the worst offender I'd had all day. But something about his voice rankled me. Where did this guy get off? He was going to sit here and tell me how rotten it was to make my money this way, like I didn't already know? Where the heck did he get off? Look, buddy, there's no reason for any of that. We're just calling to let you know about your warranty program. If you don't want it, then I'll just... He cut me off again. Don't worry about it, friend. I'm sure you'll have more prevalent things to worry about soon enough. Ciao. The line went dead then, and the silence seemed ominous. I sat the phone down like I thought it might blow up. I'd been threatened on the phone before, but this one felt different. There'd been no screaming, no cursing, no invitations to screw myself, or questions about how I slept at night. I shuddered a little, suddenly feeling like a goose had walked over my grave. I jumped a little when I saw my son standing in the doorway, scratching his neck. Michael had wandered into my office while I was on the phone. I turned to him as he stood scratching, his hand moving up and down his back, before asking if he was okay. He'd been napping, something he would have to give up when he started school next year, and it seemed that his itchy back had woken him slightly ahead of schedule. Daddy, my back is so itchy. I told him to go lay in bed while I grabbed the cream and the lotion. His mother and I called it Triceratops cream, something that always made Michael laugh, and it seemed to be the only thing that helped with his eczema when it got really bad. It's something he's suffered with since he was very young. We've had to wash his clothes with dye-free detergent, use special soap during his baths, and stay far away from things like wool. So I grabbed the cream and the lotion so I could lather him up and bring his itching to an end. As I slid his shirt off, however, I worried there might be something else going on here. Michael's back was covered in boils. A swath of small pustules with white heads were scattered over his pink skin, and they looked like pimples. There were clusters of small patches, islands of blight on a sea of normal skin, and I was honestly a little afraid to touch them. Nevertheless, I mixed the cream together and rubbed them onto his back, feeling him jump as some of the boils burst beneath my fingers. He seemed to relax when I finished, thanking me as he slid his shirt down gingerly. That was how it started. I wish I could say that was where it ended. I was proofing pages when my daughter, Michelle, arrived home from school. She stumbled into my office, her hands scratching at the back of her neck absent-mindedly, as she hugged me and told me about her day. We'd done this ever since her first day of school, and it was one of her daily rituals. She'd taken a test she believed she'd done well on, found $1 in the storm grate near the house, and told Jenny that she was being mean to Sara, so the two were no longer friends. I listened to her in a detached way, nodding and mm-hmming as she talked, noticing her scratching her neck a couple of times. The scratching didn't seem peculiar. People scratch sometimes, but I couldn't help but notice the red patch of skin on the back of her neck as she left to go start her homework. I turned back to my work, but sighed as I noticed the time. I saved my work and locked my computer. I had hardly gotten through half the chapter I was working on, but it was time to get started on dinner before my wife got home. The pork chops were cooking in the air fryer when my wife came through the door. I smiled as I turned to pull her against me, kissing the top of her head as she leaned warmly into me. She shuddered a little as my hands touched her back, but said it was just some back pain from standing all day. Mary called out again, so I was the only one working the register. Again. It was 8 straight hours of standing behind the register, listening to people complain. How'd your book proofing go today? I turned away from her, pretending to stir the potatoes as I answered. Stephanie could always tell when I was lying. Pretty good. Lots of progress. I'm sure it'll be ready for my agent in a few weeks. That's fantastic, dear. I'm sure it will be as much of a hit as your last one, she said, pressing a kiss on my stubbly cheek. I smiled, but I really wasn't so sure. It all came down to this latest book, it seemed. I just had to finish my book. I just had to write another hit. I just had to find my way back onto the bestseller list and get myself out of Dutch. Easy, right? The next morning I awoke determined to get some work done today. I would make up for my lack of work the day before and end with some real progress. I still had over 200 pages to proof, and if I didn't get them done fairly quickly, there would be no time to send them off, and quite likely I'd have to sit through notes on a second draft. As I went to wake my daughter up for school, however, I heard the hoarse cough coming from my son's room. I cracked the door to find him lying on his stomach, his shirt off and his back worse than the day before. His skin was broken out in red, angry boils, and the small white-headed blemishes of the day before had become larger and redder, their tips filled with translucent pus. He was softly moaning, his eyes begging for me to make the pain stop as they pulsated. My wife came out of the bedroom then, getting ready for work, and saw Michael's back. She ran to him, careful not to touch any of the spots, and asked me if he'd had these since yesterday. He was broken out, I said honestly, startled by the sudden appearance of the large angry boils, but it wasn't this bad. I put on lotion and cream, and he seemed to feel a lot better. Stephanie started talking quietly to herself, mostly arguing with herself about whether she could find someone to cover for her, but I told her I could take Michael to the pediatrician. Heck, what was the point of being a stay-at-home husband if I couldn't take my son to the doctor? She asked if I was sure. She knew I had work to do today, but I told her that it was nothing. I told her to go to work and that I would handle things here. I told Michael to stay in bed, not wanting him to aggravate any of the blisters he had on his back, and went to go wake Michelle up so she didn't miss her bus. I was in for another surprise when I got to her room. I opened her door and was immediately buffeted by the sound of her racking cough and her low groans from the bed. She was warm to the touch, not overly so, but definitely fevered, and I asked how she was feeling. She said it felt like she had the flu. Her throat hurt, she was hot, and her whole body ached. My wife was getting ready by then, stepping into the shower before she stepped into her uniform, and I figured it would be just as easy to make an appointment for 2 kids as it would for 1. I told Michelle to get some clothes on, and that I would make an appointment for her and Michael. With all the COVID paranoia still floating around, it was pretty easy to get an appointment last minute with the symptoms they were presenting. 1 phone call to an after-hours nurse later, and I prepared to trade all my editing and proofreading time before work for time spent sitting in the car until it was our turn to go to the back. It was an hour and a half before we made it in, and I tried to make the most of it by doing some edits on my phone. It was slow and tedious, the 2 of them glued to their phones or their gadgets in the back seat as they hacked and coughed, but I managed to get a little bit of work done before they sent me a text saying they were ready for us in the back. 30 minutes later, their pediatrician came back with very little by way of an explanation. Well, they don't have COVID, or the flu, or anything else that I can test for here. What they do have is a high fever, a very wet cough, and troubling boils all over their back. Michelle too, I asked, having not been aware that she was sporting boils as well. Michelle too, she confirmed. Her outbreak isn't as bad as Michael's, but it's getting worse. I'd recommend that you keep them at home until it clears up. Don't touch the sores with your bare hands, and if you happen to by accident, be sure to disinfect your hands with alcohol. Wear gloves and a mask when you interact with them, and go to the hospital if you or your wife start presenting symptoms. I'm hoping it clears up on its own, but if it doesn't in a day or 2, you should take them to the hospital anyway. I bundled them back into the car, a handful of prescriptions in my pocket, and called my wife as I went about getting their medications and getting them home. All of this, the meds, the visit, everything, was going to cost some, and I needed to get them settled so I could log some hours at work. My wife's insurance wasn't very good, and the money I made would be crucial if I wanted to get out of debt. I also had to find some time to work on my book, knowing in the back of my mind that it was the secret to solving my current problems. Stephanie picked up on the 3rd ring, and the cough she rumbled into the phone sounded suspiciously like the ones from the back seat. She swore it was just allergies, and commiserated with me about the diagnosis. She wished she could be there, but said that she would likely be late this evening. Mary had called out, again, and she was the only one working register today. It was noon before I got everyone medicated, set up in their rooms with lunch and toys and entertainment, and sat down at my computer so I could begin my day. As I took calls and proofed pages, I felt a little bubble of anxiety every time someone picked up the phone. I was still a little rattled by yesterday's call, but all of my calls today seemed normal enough. I actually had 2 people give me their information and buy one of the garbage warranties we offered. I had no idea whether they worked or not, but the company was paying me to make calls, not research their products. In between calls, I peeked in on the kids to make sure they were okay. Michael spent most of the day sleeping, his breath heavy and wet, and Michelle just looked at me whenever I peeked in on her, seeming listless and barely there. I gave them more meds and made sure they had juice and liquids, and kept an eye on their temperatures as I took calls in between my nursing duties. As the sun set, I began to get worried about my wife. She should have been home by now, should have been home a half an hour ago, and I was just about to call her when I heard the door pop loudly open. She was laid out on the floor of the living room, her coughs deep and wet, her own blemishes peeking from the collar of her work shirt. I took them all to the hospital then, just bundled them into the car and went. The ER didn't know what to make of them, but we've all been quarantined upstairs now as I try to figure out why I haven't gotten sick with the same symptoms as the rest of my family. They're working hard to manage their fevers. All three of them are around 103, and they're laid out on their stomachs as their boils have become very fragile. They're afraid that popping them might lead to sepsis, but the longer I look at them, the more intrigued by them I become. I've been sitting in the room for the last few hours, my only company the beeping of their machines, and as I sat next to my wife, I noticed something strange. The boils on her back seemed to be forming a pattern, the swoops almost looking like a picture. I sat stroking her hand, Stephanie groaning in and out of consciousness, and the longer I looked, the more I realized the swoops are words. Moving over to Michael, I can see he has similar words, all picked out in the pustulant boils that mark his baby-fine skin. I brought my phone out and snapped pictures of their backs, the three of them requiring a little turning and moving before the messages were visible. I'm sitting here now as I contemplate telling the doctor what I've found. I don't think it'll help, but I don't know what to make of it either. It can't be what I believe it is, but I can't think of any other explanation for the words that I'm reading swirled across the painful backs of my family. The message reads, "I've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty." My grandpa was an odd guy. He was clearly wealthy, but no one was ever sure how. He lived frugally in a small house on a quarter of an acre, with a sensible car and nothing too fancy in the house. If you'd driven past it, you would have assumed that some old-timer on a pension was just moldering away his golden years there. And you'd have been right, in some ways. Where he showed his wealth was in his generosity. Grandpa liked to give. He gave the best Christmas presents. He had the best candy for Halloween, donated to charities, and liked to see people happy. If you asked him how he could afford to be so generous, however, he would always just wink and say he had his ways. Not even my grandmother knew where his money came from, and they were married for 50 years. So when he died, we all wondered who would inherit his mysterious fortune. My cousins had loved Grandpa. Grandkids always do, but the two of us had always been close. My old man hadn't even waited till I was born to go grab some milk and cigarettes, and Grandma and Grandpa had helped my mom raise me so she could go to work. I have a lot of fond memories of sitting with Grandpa and watching TV, taking walks around the neighborhood, and eating ice cream at this little shop on the corner. He would always tell me to appreciate the little things, because the smallest things could be the ones that changed your life forever. "Take this," he would say, showing me the door knocker that he often carried in his pocket. "I found this when I was young, sifting through trash in a landfill as I looked for bottles to sell. It became my lucky charm, and it changed my life forever." Grandpa carried that door knocker for as long as I had known him, and it was pretty unique. It was a brass hand holding an apple, and it was all meticulously crafted in exhausting detail. The fingers had individual nails, the apple had a stem and leaves, and even the knuckles had wrinkles on them that had been carefully worked. I couldn't believe as a young child that Grandpa had just pulled this out of a dump, but he carried it everywhere, and I suppose it did bring him luck. The funeral was beautiful, everyone there having nothing but kind words for Grandpa and his family. After the service, my 3 cousins and I were asked to come to a will reading at the lawyer's office, and Grandpa had been as generous in death as he was in life. My cousins had received a trust fund for each of them, the amount payable on their 30th birthday, with a small living expense each month. Grandpa hadn't left a trust for me, but he had left me his little house, which I was pretty glad for. Mom had recently married, and though I liked Mike a lot, it had seemed a little odd to have her adult son living in the house that she was trying to make a new life in. Grandpa's old house was the perfect size for me, a college student with no real prospects of marriage in the near future. It was close enough to campus that I thought it would be ideal. But the lawyer had one more thing to give me. "Your grandfather was also very clear that I give you this," he said, and he handed me Grandpa's lucky charm, the brass door knocker. I thanked him, thinking I might hang it somewhere in the house in Grandpa's memory. It seemed only fitting to make a little memorial wall out of it. After all, Grandpa had loved the thing, and it had been his only constant possession for years. So I moved in that day, taking my things and wishing my mom and stepdad goodbye as I too embarked on a new life. Over the next few days, I changed the house around a little. I hung my flat screen on the wall, I moved Grandpa's favorite armchair around, I added my books to his bookshelf, and I donated his clothes and some of his other things to one of his favorite charities. I think Grandpa would have liked the thought that his stuff would help people in need, and they were very thankful. A few of them offered condolences, having read about his death in the paper. Grandpa bought a lot of his stuff from Goodwill and Habitat for Humanity, but he also donated a lot, so he was well known to them. It was Friday, about 4 days after the funeral, when I noticed the knocker on the counter and remembered my plan to hang it and make a memorial wall. I didn't have anything else planned for that day, so it seemed like a fine pursuit. I hung the knocker in the living room, putting it above the little shelf where I put some candles and a picture of Granddad. I put his wallet up there too, something else he was never without, and I added a tin of Altoids, a pocket watch I'd seen him wear, and a few other pictures of him. The door knocker was the centerpiece, and it all looked very nice when I was done. As I finished, I stepped back and admired it, thinking that Grandpa would have liked it too. That night was the first time I heard the knocking. I was lying in bed, doing some doom scrolling before I went to sleep, when suddenly I heard a loud thump from the living room. I took out my earbuds and listened, wondering if something had fallen over or maybe someone was at the door. But I didn't hear anything. I shrugged, thinking it had been my imagination, but just before I could slip the earbud back in, I heard it again. 3 long booms from the living room, then silence. I got up, wondering who could be knocking at my door at this time of night, and went to the front door and looked out the peephole. I opened the door to see if someone was joking around, but there was no one there. Front porch was empty. Grandpa didn't have any bushes or anything to hide behind. The kid, or whoever, would have had to been the freaking Flash to make it off the porch without being seen, and I closed the door and started to go back to bed. I'd come to the hallway that led there when I heard it again. 3 long booms, then silence. I turned back, looking at the door, but there was nothing. The knocking hadn't come from the door. I would have been able to tell. No, it had come from the living room. I glanced around, looking for someone at the window, or maybe the rattle of a woodpecker on the eaves, but there was nothing. I decided to go back to bed and try to make sense of it later, but that wasn't the last time I heard it. I heard the knocking a couple of times over the weekend, but I could never quite nail down where it was coming from. It was always either 1, 2, or 3 knocks, followed by a 10-second pause, and then the same number of knocks before it stopped. By Monday, I was pulling my hair out, wondering if this was the pipes or something in the walls. Then I finally caught it. I'd found a wedding picture of my grandparents, sitting in a desk, something Grandpa had probably put away so he wouldn't miss Grandma too much, and I decided it would look very nice on the shelf with the other memories. I was adding the wedding picture beside one of Grandpa accepting an award for philanthropy when the knocking on the wall suddenly rattled and thumped. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, but it thumped once, twice, 3 times, and was quiet for about 10 seconds. I had just thought it might be a fluke or something. Then it did it again. Thump, thump, thump. Then silence. I took it off the wall and looked for some kind of motor or something, but it's just a normal brass knocker. It happened 2 more times that day, and I was extremely curious as to what made it do it and why. I started going through Grandpa's desk, hoping for some explanation, and that's when I found the letter. It was in the middle of a ledger book, addressed to me, and it wasn't even sealed, which was unlike Grandpa. It was just a single page of notebook paper, and I was glad to see Grandpa's cramped handwriting speaking to me from the page. I hope you're enjoying the house, and I hope you found this letter in a timely manner. I'd considered leaving it to Wilson to give to you, but I thought it might be better if you came across it naturally. Also, I wanted you to receive the knocker, and Wilson may have decided to keep it if he read the letter. He's a good man, an honest man, but greed can do funny things to people. You've probably noticed by now that the door knocker taps on its own sometimes. You wouldn't believe how I discovered its power, a complete accident, but I swear that what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true. The door knocker opens to different places. Place it on a door and wait for the knocks. Once it knocks, open the door and travel to where it takes you. The knocker only has 3 destinations, but they have been of great benefit to me and our family. When it knocks, you'll have 10 seconds to open the door. The second set of knocks is the door closing, so it won't work if you catch it on the second set. One knock opens onto the treasury, a room of treasures. Coins, gems, gold, all piled to the ceiling. If anything guards it, it has never bothered me, but I'm always careful not to take too much. 2 knocks opens onto the library, a room stuffed with bookshelves. You can spend hours, days even in this place, and time won't pass outside the door. I've learned so many things here, things lost to time, and read about things that have yet to happen. 3 knocks opens onto a void, a darkness that I dare not enter. Anything you put in here will be gone. Anything. There's no ground outside it, though, so don't walk in. I'm ashamed to say that it's where I've been putting my trash, but it's also where I hid your dog, the one I said that ran away when you were young. He died suddenly, just lay over and died, and I put him in there before you woke up from your nap. I'm sorry I never told you, but you were so young when it happened that I didn't think you would mourn him for long. The knocks were never consistent, but each knock seems to come at least once a day. The 3 knocks usually come in the evening or the early afternoon. 1 knock is usually in the morning or before noon, and the 2 knocks come when it will. While you're inside, don't let the door close. I was stuck in the library for a long, long time once, and was fortunate that your uncle came along and opened the door. Time doesn't affect people the same way inside the door as it does out here, so spend as much time as you want there. If you get hurt, however, you'll be injured, so be careful. You and I have always been close, and I know that you and your cousins have speculated for years about my mysterious fortune. The knocker is yours to do with what you will, but always remember that money breeds difficulty, which is why I have always kept it a secret. Good luck. I love you, kiddo. I read through the note a few times, trying to make sense of it. There was no way. Grandpa had always been sharp, no real problems mentally, but this sounded like the ramblings of a madman or a lunatic. The knocker, however, had moved on its own, that much was true. It occurred to me that there was a way to test the rest of it, so I decided to do just that. I took the knocker off the wall where I had hung it and attached it to the closet door in the living room. It looked a little silly there, a door knocker on a door that opened onto a closet with 2 coats and a bunch of board games in it, but I wanted to be sure. It was silly, the kind of thing you read about in fairy tales, but I wanted to be sure. I had a while to wait, but It finally happened, just as I was thinking about going to bed. It was around 10:30, and I reached for the remote to turn the TV off when I heard it. 2 loud knocks, seconds apart, on the closet door. I popped up, remembering I had 10 seconds to get there, and threw the door open. I expected to find the same closet that had been there earlier. I expected this to be a joke from my grandfather. But I didn't expect to find the great library that he had talked about on the other side. It was huge, a library to rival any I'd ever seen, and the windows shone with perfect sunlight as I stood in shock. The shelves were tall, taller than the roof of the house I stood in, and they had long trestled ladders with wheels to slide along the floor. I could see a grand staircase, and I felt sure that there would be levels above the next as well. I could learn anything in there. I could learn everything in there. But I remembered what Grandpa had said about not getting closed inside, and I looked for something to prop the door open with. I saw an end table and pulled it over to put in the way, stepping inside and marveling at the space. I spent hours perusing books. There were books on languages, on history, on science, on anything I would want to know. I only explored the first floor that night, but there was enough there to keep me reading for days, maybe months. I was studying architecture at college, and there was a whole section of books I could use to study any period, any style, and anything else I wanted. This place was like the libraries they talked about in Alexandria, the libraries in the Harry Potter books, and some kind of wizard's private collection from a fantasy novel, all rolled into one. Time may have moved differently here, but it didn't stop me from getting tired. I'd been excited when I came in, but after a couple of hours, I was yawning and rubbing my eyes. I decided to come back another time and let the door close as I pushed the end table out of the way. It was true. I couldn't believe it, but I had seen it myself. Grandpa had a magic door knocker. I spent the next few days testing each knock pattern, and Grandpa's observations had been spot on. I found the room with the gold in it the next day, and it was almost more impressive than the library. Think of a room full of any kind of money you could want. Gold bars, U.S. currency, ancient denarii, little stones with things scratched on them, gems, pearls, silver nuggets, and other things I didn't even have a name for. I reached for a stack of hundreds with a shaky hand and brought them out before I let the door close again. I had made about $2,000 in a matter of seconds, and I put it somewhere safe before heading to class. The void was a little scarier when I got to it, but I'd been setting garbage bags beside the door just in case, and I was home when the knocks finally came. The void was just what it claimed to be. It was like looking out at a night sky, except there was no stars. It was an inky, unnatural blackness, and I wondered if maybe Nietzsche had been describing this place when he talked about staring into the abyss. The space was utterly devoid of anything, but it seemed to crouch as well, just waiting for me to drop my guard. The bags went in, falling into a soundless, airless void before I closed the door again. It was great for a while, truly a blessing. I had all the money I needed, and whatever I took seemed to come back after I shut the door. I could take books from the library if I needed to, and anything I left on the work tables would put itself away on the shelf. I spent a lot of time in the library when I got there, and sometimes I would wake up to find that I'd fallen asleep. The door never slammed shut and trapped me in there, and without anyone to come behind me and accidentally close it, I felt safe in there. I learned so much in a relatively short time, and my professors were impressed with my knowledge. I considered bringing them the books I'd used to gain that knowledge, but I thought better of it. How would I explain it to them? A guy in his early 20s who just happened to have a book that was probably hundreds of years old. It was something that would probably gain the attention of the wrong sort of people. I was careful not to use too much of the money, not to spread it around too much, and careful not to show anyone the books I got from the library. It went well for about 4 months, but then I started getting knocks of another sort from the door. It started subtly, with little knocks and taps from time to time. I'm sure I missed a lot of them, but I would sometimes look up as I was watching TV or reading, expecting to see the knocker tapping, but finding it silent. I started watching the door closer, getting strange lights wafting beneath it sometimes. They would skitter across the bottom like strange shadows, and I found myself watching them more than the TV after a while. My trips to the other places were still uneventful, the landscapes the same as they had always been, but it was the time in between the knocks that I came to dread. Then one night, something knocked back. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a familiar boom sound 3 times. I checked the clock and saw it was nearly 11. A little late for knocking, but I stuck my head out to look at the door nonetheless. The toothbrush was still in my mouth, and I had expected to see nothing stranger than the knocker fall back into place. Instead, something knocked again, and it wasn't the knocker. I came slowly out of the bathroom, watching as strange lights came flashing from beneath the cracks of the door. It was like a haunted house attraction, and I almost expected to see smoke billowing out from underneath it. The knocks were shy, almost uncertain, and I was preparing to head to my room when something hit the door hard enough to shake it in the frame. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, and when it hit again, I fell onto my butt and just watched it shake. Whatever was knocking was adamant about getting in, and it slammed its weight into the door again and again. The knob rattled and shook. The lights flashed faster and angrier. My teeth were chattering. This had never happened before, and I was terrified that whatever it was might get through. It slammed into it again, the old wood cracking in the frame. And when it struck this time, I saw something break through the surface and come grabbing blindly from within. It was an arm, a long purple arm covered in scales. It thrashed around trying to find something to grab, and the sounds from within were like bats and birds turned up to 1,000. It shivered right on the edge of hearing, and I expected my ears to start bleeding. It was looking for the knob, and I wasn't sure what would happen if it found it. Instead, it bumped into the knocker. It fell off the door. It was only held on by a couple of screws, and as it clattered onto the floor, the most hellish sound of all ripped through the hole before cutting off as suddenly as it had begun. The lights, the noise, and the banging all stopped with a suddenness that made me dizzy. I stood up, looking at the broken door, and walked slowly into the living room to see the extent of the damage. Something was bumping, but I thought maybe the arm had knocked something over. I wanted to make sure the knocker was okay, but as I came around Grandpa's old chair, I saw what was making all the noise. It was the arm that had come through the door. It was leaking black fluid all over the hardwood and flopping around like a fish. It didn't flop for long, but now I'm left with a problem. The portal only seems to open when the knocker is up, but unless it's up, I can't open it. I wonder if this is why Grandpa kept it with him so often. Did he perhaps have a visitor one night when he least expected it? For now, I'm keeping the knocker in my bedside table, but even as I lay here writing this, I can hear it bumping against the wood every now and again. The money will eventually run out. That or my curiosity will get the better of me, and I'll hang the knocker again. But I think for now I'll let it sit. No need to invite trouble if I don't have to. penny for your thoughts, young man?" I glanced down at the old man as he sat in the snow, his jeans getting crusty from the ice. He held a grubby coin in his threadbare glove, and his eyes looked up imploring me to take it. Homeless people weren't exactly rare in the city, and I was honestly tired of being asked for change today. I had been asked for change as I went to work that morning, several times. I'd been asked when I stepped out to have a smoke around 10 that morning. I'd been asked again as I went to lunch, and twice more as I returned. I'd been asked for handouts throughout the day, but this was the first one who had offered to give me anything in return. I reached down hesitantly, and when he moved it out of the way, I figured he would make his pitch now. The coin was rare, the coin would be special, he would want something for it, and I would be asked to give. "Your thoughts first, son. An even trade, I'm sure." I drew in a noseful of cold air, thinking about making something up, before finally settling on the truth. "Okay, you know what I'm thinking about? I'll tell you. I pass people like you every day, people on the street with nothing better to do than beg. Why not try to better yourself with all this time you have? Why not drag yourself out of your situation rather than sit and huddle in it? You have the ability to get out of your current quagmire. You choose not to, and that makes me angry." I'd expected the old man to get mad. I expected him to get quiet and take his coin back. But he surprised me when he laughed. "Is that what you think? That we're all just lazy bums out on the road with nothing better to do? I imagine you might change your mind if you had to do it yourself." I scoffed. "Please, living off the generosity of others? This is a city of thousands. Even if only 1% showed you charity, that's still likely more than I make in a week." The old man smiled knowingly, and that should have been my first indication that something was amiss. Even then, I sensed that something didn't feel right here. This wasn't the usual kind of banter one had with a person, even someone like this guy. It was starting to prickle the hair on the back of my neck. Why'd I stop to talk to this fella at all? The whole thing just felt odd. "Want to make a wager on it?" the old beggar asked. He still had the coin out, and when I got a good look at it, I could tell it wasn't what I had thought it was. It was filthy, but it had the underlying gleam of gold. It was unevenly milled and thick on the edge, he showed me. "Live for a week as I do, if you can. After 7 days, if you're still alive, I'll grant you any wish your heart desires." I shook my head, thinking the old man had to be crazy. What was he, some kind of genie? My mind flashed to the Beauty and the Beast story, too, however. Hadn't the fairy come to him on a snowy night and made requests? If I declined his offer, what would the consequences be? I shook my head. I was a grown man out here weighing fairy tales. What was wrong with me? "Sure, old-timer, it's a deal. What do I need to do? Prick my finger? Promise you my firstborn?" "Just take the coin," he said, holding it out. "But make sure you hang on to it. If you go the full week and lose the coin, well, I can't promise it'll end well for you." I rolled my eyes, reaching for it without thinking. I wasn't really afraid that it might be magic, more concerned that it might be coated in fentanyl or acid or something. I had gloves on, though, and I didn't expect that whatever he had coated it in would get through my leather wraps. I lifted the coin to my eye, looking at it in the dim light of the lamppost, and saw that it was bigger than I had thought it would be. It was the size of a $50, one side picturing a proud king, while the other side a grinning skeleton. The words "Percussum est Della" were printed on the front with "Vivero ve dal mare ab io" emblazoned on the back. I knew that was Latin, but that was all I knew. The coin was old, some ancient edifice of commerce, and as I looked at it in the street lamp, it flashed in my eye with a stabbing pain. The last thing I heard was the old man laughing, and then I fell into darkness for some undetermined amount of time. I was awoken not by my alarm, but by the less than kind tap of a stick on my foot. Hey, I've already told you can't sleep here. Pack it up before I call the cops. I came groggily awake, aware of being cold and slightly damp before anything else. I put a hand up to my eyes, wondering what had been on that coin the old man had given me, and as my vision came into view, I saw a large man in an apron standing over me with a broom. He held it with the blunt end raised, preparing to swing it if I made any sudden moves. I put a hand up and told him that there was some kind of mistake, but when I raised my hand, I saw it was wrapped in threadbare gloves, the same ones that had been holding the coin last night. What's more, my clothes felt scratchy, like bugs had been crawling on me, and as I got up, the man with the broom tensed like he meant to take a swing. I'm serious. Get the hell out of here before I call the cops. I told him I was going, and as I stumbled out of the alley, I saw that it was early morning. There was still ice on the ground, steam coming up through the sewer vents, and people were milling up the sidewalk on their way to work or wherever. I must have looked a mess because they walked past me without a second glance. The man with the broom was watching me from the mouth of the alley that I'd been sleeping in, and made it pretty clear that if I didn't start moving, he was going to make good on his threat to call the police. As I made my way down the street, I was already reaching for my cell phone. I'd call an Uber and get back to my apartment. I was unsurprised to find it was missing, as was my wallet and my house keys. No problem. They had no idea which apartment I lived in, so the key wouldn't do them any good. A car was something I never saw the need to own, so I had no vehicle for them to steal. The old man had gotten away with about $80 from my wallet at the end of the day, and anything he took from my bank account would be returned. I'd go to my apartment and tell them I'd been mugged, and they would help me get into my place. I hoped the old man had a good laugh after drugging and stripping me, leaving me in an alley as he dressed me like a vag and took my stuff. Live a week like us, indeed. I'd be back in my apartment in a matter of minutes. Then the police could show him what it was like to live as an inmate. I was full of indignant rage as I passed in front of the big shop window not far from my house, and that's when I caught sight of myself in the reflection. At first, I thought the old man was taunting me, following me to see what I would do once I woke up. But when I rounded on him to give him a piece of my mind, I realized I was looking at my own reflection. I was the old man, his leathery skin and short gray hair, and I just stood there, touching my face with my hand as I tried to make sense of it. Live as we live for a week, if you can. I suddenly understood that there would be no going back to my apartment. There would be no talking to my bank or getting my phone replaced. I felt something heavy against my left butt cheek, and I reached into the back of my threadbare jeans to find the coin nestled there. I looked at both sides, the Emperor and the skull, and suddenly discovered that I could read the words there. "Thus the deal is struck," read the Emperor. "Live or be damned by it," said the skull. I wanted to fling it into the street, but I remembered what he had said and slipped it back into my pocket. I had noticed something else that both sides had shared. The minting date was a week from now, and that mirrored what the old man had said too. Live for a week as I live, if you can. I nodded. How hard could it be? That first day was probably my high point. I was full of resolve as I walked around the city. I didn't have any luck with breakfast, but that was okay. I didn't see any need to beg. I'd find money if I needed it. Besides, begging would only prove that he was right. I was going to do something with my week, start a new job, or find an honest way to make money. So, I set out to find work. One look at myself was enough to tell me that I'd be turned away from most upscale jobs. I needed a shave and a haircut badly. My clothes were old and stained, and I needed a bath worse than I needed a meal. All these things were outside my grasp without money, but I knew where I might get some of them. I'd heard of the mission shelters. Everyone had heard of them, seen them on the billboards, or heard their commercials. I knew they had clothes I could use and maybe facilities I could use to take a shower. If I could get myself back to rights, then I could secure employment and not have to beg. I would likely have to spend a night or two in the mission, but I would have a job and money, and I could get back on my feet before the week was out. I came to the mission around 9 and was met at the door by a man with a clipboard. "Good morning. Are you checking in?" "I was hoping to get some clothes for an interview, maybe a shower and some—" "Terrific," the man said, cutting me off. "Are you part of our employment program? You don't look familiar." "Well, no, but I want to use the clothes to gain employment so I can—" "Unfortunately, sir, those clothes are only for people in our employment program, and there is a sizable waiting list for that program. I can get you on that waiting list, but it's likely to be some time before we can—" Started getting a little indignant. "I mean, the clothes are donated. As a taxpayer, those are my taxes at work. I'll bring them back. I just need to look good for an interview." The man's well-crafted smile was beginning to slip. "Do you have an interview lined up then?" I realized my mistake and admitted that I didn't. "Well then, you have no reason to need those clothes. Now, if you'd like to get on our program list, we can do that, but again, that takes time." I was a little put out, the process seeming a little daunting, and I told him I'd like a meal and a shower, if I could. "And I want you to have those things too, but if this is your first time here, then we need you to fill out some paperwork so we can get you on our system. If you'll step right over here, we can—" "Do I need to register for a bowl of soup and a hot shower?" I didn't mean to become belligerent, but I was a little put out by the rigmarole. "Sir, have you been drinking? I believe I detect alcohol on your breath, and you're becoming quite upset. We can't allow you in if you're inebriated, and you have to be 24 hours sober before you can enter the mission. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." I said some things then, things I regret now, and I didn't even see the young bruiser who stepped between us as I got in the clipboard man's face. When he tossed me onto the sidewalk, the man with the clipboard saying I wasn't welcome at the mission again, I got creakily to my feet and checked to see if I was all there. Other than some bruises, I was none the worse for wear. I was still hopeful that I could make my way without them, so I set off to find employment. By the end of the first day, I was shivering on a bench in the park that I'd never seen before. The park was less for joggers and bird watchers, and more for drunks and needlers. A pair of them were sharing syringes near an old oak tree not too far away as I tried to get warm under some newspapers I had scavenged. I tried to ignore my empty belly, too, as I lay with the cold wood beneath me. I hadn't eaten much today, just a part of a sandwich I'd found in a garbage can, and I was feeling empty as I tried to sleep. I told myself that tomorrow would be better, and I fell asleep, praying that it would be so. Just 6 more days to go. The next day I woke up ravenous, my head spinning and my mouth dry. It was early, first light, and I knew that if I wanted to eat today, I needed to get some money. As luck would have it, I found something not far from the park. There was a warehouse nearby, and I heard men unloading a truck as they prepared to load up another. I offered to help. Most of the workers looked like scabs anyway, and the guy with the magazine and the cigar told me that he'd beat whatever I broke out of me, and to get to work. I spent a few hours moving boxes from one truck to another, and when the guy came out and told us we were done, he put a $10 bill in my hand and told me thanks. "Come back tomorrow if you want another one," he said. I wanted to be happy as I looked at the crumpled bill, but I realized this wouldn't take me very far if I wasn't careful. I tried to make it last, buying a coffee from a gas station, along with a simple breakfast, but by noon, the tin was spent. I'd been walking the streets, trying to luck into some grunt work. I found another warehouse offering under-the-table jobs, but as the sun went down and we all came to the office to get paid, it seemed that the boss had left, and we were left with no options but to disperse or answer to the police. I went back to the same park again that night, but the cold after the sun went down was too much to bear in the open. I walked around trying to find somewhere to sleep out of the elements, and at around 2, I found a doorway that lacked the little rubber spikes they usually put out to dissuade homeless from sleeping there. As I shivered in the doorway, I told myself it would only be another 5 days. As I slipped into sleep, I hoped I'd be alive to see the end of those 5 days. The next day, day 3, I finally gave in and began begging. The job I'd found the day before wasn't open, the gates barred, and the snow deep enough to keep the trucks off the road. I was hungry, I was cold, and I didn't dare go back to the mission. So I found the warmest spot I could find and began panhandling. The crowd that morning was small, the snow closing a lot of the businesses, and they weren't overly generous. By the time noon rolled around, I had a few dollars and some change in the can that I'd managed to scoop out of a dumpster. It got me some junk that wasn't very filling, and I walked around looking for work as the snow began to melt. I was a little more wary about taking odd jobs, lest I get taken like the day before. And as the night began to settle and the people made their way home, I once again set up to beg. I was dozing against a wall, feeling weak and tired from the cold, when someone cleared their throat loudly. I opened my eyes to find 2 cops standing over me, looking cold and grumpy. "Move along, sir. You know you can't do that here." He poked my can with his foot, sending it tipping over as the small amount of change rattled out. "I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just hungry." "Doesn't matter. Hungry or not, you can't do that here. Get moving before we move you." I wanted to get indignant, but I simply didn't have the energy. I scooped up the coins and started trudging through the snow again. I didn't know where I was going, but I remembered the old man's words and knew I would lose what precious coins I had if I got arrested. I wasn't even halfway through the week, and I already felt like I might not make it to reap my reward. The next few days were a blur. I remember trying to donate plasma and being turned away for various reasons. I looked for work, but the snow had ground a lot of businesses to a halt. I found warm places that would feed me, churches and soup kitchens, but they weren't equipped to let people stay. I ended up sleeping rough both nights, shivering on stoops or under the slight cover of alleys, my blanket getting soaked in the snow as it melted beneath me. It was the most miserable I'd ever been, and it made me wonder where I'd ever gotten the idea that the homeless of the city were lazy. Looking back on my words to the vagrant, words spoken out of ignorance, I felt a deep sense of shame as I remembered how I had talked to him. He was just trying to get a meal, just trying to survive or find somewhere that wasn't a chilly bench to sleep for the night. And all I had seen was a leech trying to get fat off the hard work of others. As I lay beside a dumpster Friday night, watching people drink in the warm light of a familiar bar, I knew I'd never make that mistake again. Saturday dawned cold and dark, the snow melt making the ice thick on the sidewalks as the world came awake again. I had some luck after helping the owner of the store I was sleeping beside clear the ice from the front of the stoop. He patted my shoulder, giving me a plastic bag of sandwiches he was about to throw away. I marveled at them, counting about 12 of the plastic-wrapped squares, and he even threw in a cup of coffee to go along with it. I tried to tell him it was too much, but he waved his hands and laughed. "You're doing me a favor, really. Those sandwiches were going to go in the garbage before I almost busted my ass on that slick sidewalk. If you can get some use out of them, more power to you. Take them with my thanks." By 10, I had eaten about 5 of them, the coffee long gone, and I felt full for the first time in quite a while. It was something I had taken for granted, that feeling of being nearly too full. But as I sat in the park, my blanket keeping the worst of the snow from soaking into me, it felt good to be here again. I had refilled the coffee cup from a nearby fountain, and as I drank water and soaked up the sunshine, I felt pretty good about the direction I was going. "Hey, friend," came a familiar voice, and my eyes snapped open as I started to bolt. It was a man in similar dress, his face scraggly from many days of beard growth, and he was smiling through his remaining teeth at me. I could smell him between the 10 feet that separated us, but it wasn't an altogether unpleasant smell. He simply smelled earthy as opposed to bad, stale in a way that made me think he was taking care of his clothes when he could, and the jacket he wore bulged humorously, making me think he wore at least 2. "Whoa there, didn't mean to scare you. I was just wondering if I could trade you for one of them sandwiches. I've got some of them vitamin C packs from the free clinic. You can mix them with your water and get something nice to drink to go along with your full belly." He was holding out a crumpled silver packet with the words "Emergency" on the front, and I nodded as I held out a ham and cheese for him. He smiled again, asking if he could sit as he tore into the sandwich with gusto. He had clearly not been eating well, and I realized that must have been the way I had torn into the first one that I'd eaten earlier. "Name's Carter. Good to meet you, friend. Haven't seen you around. Are you new in town?" I told him I was, since it wasn't technically a lie. He laughed and told me I'd picked a heck of a time to come to town. It was the worst snowstorm they had seen in a long time, and the homeless guys were having a hell of a time keeping warm. Between the mission and their paperwork, and the cops and their endless rage for guys just trying to get by, and the shopkeepers not wanting us in their alleys or stoops, it's getting hard to find a place to lay your head most nights. A few others had wandered over to see who Carter was talking to, and they traded some food for the sandwiches as well. I ended up giving away a few of them, and as the afternoon stretched on, they all decided to migrate somewhere to find warmth for the night. I told them good night, meaning to find my own place to sleep, but Carter called my name before they left the park and asked if I was coming. "There's always room for one more around the fire," he said. I spent that night sitting in an alley that was in the middle of a 4-way intersection of buildings. It cut the wind nicely, and someone had secured a tarp to keep the snow off of us. The barrels here had coals burning in them, and the people who stayed here had created a kind of oasis in the swirling snow. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing," Carter said. I spent the evening in the company of other cast-offs, laughing and sharing food around as we warmed ourselves by the fires that glowed throughout the night. Someone had a guitar, other people told stories. I fell asleep against a wall in the best shape I'd been in for the last 5 days. I wished I had known these people from the start, and wished I had found a place from the very first day. But I was introspective enough to know that I would have insulted them at the start of this strange journey. This was a place I had come to naturally, a state of mind I had reached on my own, and as I slipped into a blissful slumber, I hoped it wouldn't simply disappear when I woke up, like some kind of dream. I wish it had now. The alternative was a lot worse. I woke up to the sounds of people yelling and running. One of the barrels had been turned over, the coals making smoke as they tried to catch a sleeping bag on fire. People were screaming, scooping up what they could as people moved in the dancing shadows with purpose. I shivered beneath my blanket, certain we were being attacked by demons, but as the shapes got closer, I saw they were police officers. They had discovered our camp, and now they were taking away our one refuge from the cold. I sat as still as I could, trying to be unseen, and when they moved away, I made a break for the nearest alley. I saw flashing lights and heard someone yell at me, but I just kept kicking up snow as I ran for my life. The sun was turning the horizon a hopeful pink, but I just kept moving. When people got in my way, I went around them. When bus stops or stoops rose up to block me, I moved around them too. I didn't dare stop until the sun beat down on my neck, and only then it was because I just couldn't go anymore. My legs were tired, my head spinning from overexertion, and when I flopped down onto the bench in a bus shell, I was out of breath. I kept trying to make sense of what had happened, but it just wouldn't mesh in my brain. Why had they come after us? We weren't hurting anyone. We were just looking for a warm place to gather. They had come in like we were terrorists, and I hoped that Carter and some of the others that I had met had made it away. I didn't know how long I sat there, but as my stomach started to growl, I knew I would need food. I thought I might put out my hat and try to get some money. The longer I sat there with my eyes closed, the more I wondered what the point was. The oasis now felt like a dirty trick. They'd allowed me a moment of happiness so they could pull the rug out from under me, just as I thought I might have found something better. I almost preferred the uncertainty of not knowing what to expect. As the day passed, I continued to sit on the cold metal bench. What was the point after all? If everything could change in a second, if all safety was an illusion, then why do anything? "Enjoying your new life of leisure?" I jumped, realizing someone had sat down next to me. I opened my eyes and realized it was me. I looked exactly the same as I always did in the mirror, but I realized that it had to be the old man, pretending to be me. As I sat here, day had become night, and just like that, we had passed 7 days. I'd done it, had weathered the storm, and I like to hope I was a better person for it. "Just basking in my newfound sense of understanding," I answered, realizing it was true. I took the grubby coin out of my pocket and held it in my hand, finding a strange warmth coming from it as we sat in the chill. "Well, you made it, and a deal is a deal. What will you wish for, now that you have all this knowledge?" I put the coin in his hand, feeling the warmth transfer between us. "I want the means to make sure no one else has to live like this. I want to help people, even if it's just in this town." Is that too vague? He closed his hand around the coin, and I felt that warmth radiate through my stomach. "I can work with that." I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was me again. I was sitting there as if waiting for a bus, and when I got up, I knew what I had to do. It was hard starting out, but the backers came, and as the money came, I slowly fed them. Slowly, I brought them off the street and gave them a place to stay. A decade ago, I took a coin from a beggar. Today, I own one of the largest shelters in the city. There are no confusing forms, no prerequisites, no red tape. We feed those who are hungry. We house those in need. And when I see the hope in their eyes, I know my wish has come true.